Judy Garland's innocent smile and magical voice lurked a studio-manufactured addiction nightmare that began when MGM executives forced amphetamines on her at just 13 years old. From beloved family entertainers who terrorized their children to screen legends living elaborate double lives, these 19 stories reveal the shocking truth. Hollywood's most compelling dramas weren't on the silver screen. They were hiding in plain sight. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin's little character embodied innocence and childlike wonder, but behind the mustache lurked a man with a disturbing preference for extremely young women. Hollywood's first global superstar repeatedly pursued teenage girls, marrying 16-year-old Mildred Harris when he was 29 and 15-year-old Lita Grey when he was 35. Chaplin had a type, and that type was girls barely out of childhood, noted film historian Edward Marshall. The studio system enabled his behavior, handling payoffs and settlements. They saw his conduct as simply part of the cost of keeping a genius happy and productive. The most shocking incident came when Grey became pregnant, creating a legal crisis that required immediate damage control. Their hasty Mexican wedding was essentially a shotgun wedding disguised as a love match to avoid statutory charges that could have sent him to prison. The marriage predictably collapsed, with Grey later describing Chaplin as controlling and emotionally abusive. When Grey filed for divorce after bearing 2 sons, her complaint included explosive allegations about Chaplin's psychological cruelty. The settlement of $600,000 was the largest in American history at that time. Theater owners threatened boycotts, and morality clauses began appearing in performer contracts directly inspired by the Chaplin-Grey controversy. The pattern continued with Joan Barry filing a paternity suit in 1943. Despite blood tests indicating Chaplin wasn't the father, the court ruled the evidence inadmissible. His on-screen genius couldn't mask the reality. Hollywood's most beloved comedian used his power to access vulnerable young women in a pattern spanning decades. Judy Garland. America fell in love with Judy Garland as innocent Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, never suspecting the 16-year-old was already trapped in a nightmare of studio-enforced substance dependency that would eventually claim her life. MGM executives turned a talented teen into a pharmaceutical experiment to maintain their investment. What MGM did to Judy Garland was nothing short of criminal by today's standards, explained a former studio employee. They started her on pills when she was just 13 years old. Amphetamines to lose weight and maintain energy through punishing filming schedules, followed by barbiturates to help her sleep. She never had a chance. Studio head Louis B. Mayer and producers obsessed over Garland's figure, subjecting her to constant criticism about her weight. Internal memos reveal executives referring to her as the little hunchback while strategizing ways to keep her thin at all costs. Their solution? A chemical regimen that created dependency before she could legally vote. The studios had doctors on payroll who would prescribe whatever was needed to keep the talent working, revealed a retired MGM production assistant. They weren't treating illnesses, they were managing assets. If a prescription kept a valuable star on schedule, no one questioned the long-term consequences. As Garland aged out of wholesome roles, her addiction worsened. Multiple hospitalizations and erratic behavior marked her adult years. When she died of a barbiturate overdose in 1969 at just 47, the official cause was listed as accidental, but those who understood her history recognized a darker truth. Her death was the final act in a tragedy that began in the MGM commissary, where studio executives first decided pills were the solution to transforming a normal teenager into a marketable star. Errol Flynn. On-screen, Errol Flynn defined swashbuckling heroism with his dashing good looks and roguish charm. Behind the cameras, however, Flynn's life spiraled into a disturbing pattern of alleged inappropriate behavior, alcoholism, and violence that would eventually destroy his career and health. Flynn lived by the motto, "In like Flynn," a phrase that actually originated to describe his ability to talk his way past studio security, explained a veteran Warner Brothers employee. But that phrase took on darker connotations as rumors about his private behavior spread through Hollywood. Those rumors culminated in 1942 when Flynn was charged with inappropriate behavior involving 2 teenage girls, 17-year-old Betty Hansen and 16-year-old Peggy Satterley. The subsequent trial became a media sensation, with Flynn's attorney successfully portraying the girls as sophisticated youngsters trying to exploit the star. Though Flynn was acquitted, the trial revealed disturbing patterns involving young women. The studio publicity machine worked overtime to salvage Flynn's image, noted a former publicist familiar with the case. They portrayed him as the victim of gold diggers and opportunists. But within the industry, people knew Flynn had a preference for very young women that went beyond this one incident. As Flynn's star power faded, his personal demons accelerated his decline. Alcoholism transformed the once handsome star into a bloated shadow of himself by his 40s. His yacht, ominously named the Zaka, became notorious for wild parties that grew increasingly desperate as his career declined. By the time Flynn died in 1959, at the age of 50, his body was so damaged by substance abuse that the coroner reported he had the internal organs of an elderly man. The swashbuckler who had once leapt gracefully across the screen died broke and physically ruined, his legacy forever tainted by the accusations that had followed him throughout his later career. Joan Crawford. Few Hollywood memoirs have had the cultural impact of Mommy Dearest, Christina Crawford's shocking account of life as the adopted daughter of Oscar-winning actress Joan Crawford. Published in 1978, just a year after Joan's death, the book portrayed the beloved movie star as a monster behind closed doors, an alcoholic perfectionist who subjected her children to extraordinary physical and emotional abuse. She played perfect mothers while terrorizing her children off-screen, noted a film critic who studied Crawford's career. The contrast between her public image and private behavior couldn't have been more stark. The most infamous scene described in the book involved Joan discovering Christina had hung clothes on wire hangers. In a rage, Crawford allegedly dragged her daughter from bed in the middle of the night, screaming about the cost of proper wooden hangers while striking her. This wire hangers scene became shorthand for the book's broader allegations that behind the glamorous facade lurked a deeply disturbed woman. Adding another troubling layer to this family history were the circumstances of Christina's adoption itself. Joan acquired Christina and her other children through notorious baby broker Georgia Tann, who ran the Tennessee Children's Home Society, an organization later revealed to have engaged in widespread child trafficking. Tann obtained many children through coercion, deception, or outright kidnapping from poor families. The adoption itself was tied to Georgia Tann's child trafficking ring, confirmed a researcher familiar with Tann's operation. Crawford likely didn't know the criminal methods Tann used to acquire children, but she was participating in a system that separated poor children from their biological families for profit. Whether Christina's most severe allegations were true or embellished, the book forced a reckoning with the gap between carefully constructed celebrity images and private reality. Joan Crawford had built her later career playing strong, sacrificing mothers in films like Mildred Pierce, for which she won her Oscar. The possibility that this on-screen maternal devotion masked real-life cruelty created a disturbing cognitive dissonance for fans and critics alike. Clark Gable and Loretta Young. In 1935, Clark Gable was Hollywood's undisputed king, while Loretta Young was a rising star and devoted Catholic whose carefully maintained image of piety was central to her appeal. When they were cast together in The Call of the Wild, something happened that would create one of Hollywood's longest-running family secrets. Away from the watchful eyes of the studio system, Gable and Young began an affair. By the time filming wrapped, Young was pregnant with Gable's child, a catastrophe for both their careers. Gable was married to Maria Langham at the time, making the situation not just scandalous but potentially criminal in an era when adultery laws were still enforced. What followed was an elaborate deception orchestrated by Young. Herself, she disappeared from Hollywood, claiming exhaustion, and secretly gave birth to a daughter in November 1935. Then, in a move that would today seem unthinkable, Young arranged to adopt her own biological child, telling the press she had fallen in love with a little girl at an orphanage. America's leading man and the child he never claimed was how one industry insider described the situation years later. Everyone in Hollywood knew who Judy's father was. Those ears were pure Gable. There was no hiding it. Indeed, Judy Lewis grew up with a striking resemblance to Gable, particularly her ears, which protruded noticeably. Young took extraordinary measures to hide this resemblance. forcing her daughter to wear bonnets and having her ears surgically pinned back at age 7. Photographers were instructed never to capture Judy in profile. Gable never acknowledged Judy as his daughter. He met her only once, briefly visiting the set of a film Young was making. He was polite but distant, giving no indication that he was speaking to his own child. The truth remained hidden for decades. Young maintained the fiction until 1999, just months before her death at age 87, when she finally admitted to her authorized biographer that Judy was indeed her biological child with Gable. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth's transformation from Margarita Carmen Cancino to the glamorous, red-headed love goddess of 1940s Hollywood represents one of the industry's most dramatic makeovers. Studio publicists crafted a narrative of discovered talent and natural beauty, but the reality of Hayworth's early life was far darker than the public knew. Hollywood's love goddess never escaped her father's shadow, noted a film historian who studied Hayworth's life. The damage done in those early years shaped everything that followed. Born to a Spanish dancer father, Eduardo Cancino, and an American showgirl mother, Rita began performing professionally at just 12 years old, dancing in seedy border town casinos between Tijuana and California. Eduardo took his daughter out of school and made her his dance partner after his wife refused to continue performing with him, creating a professional relationship that multiple biographers have described as inappropriate and exploitative. Forced to dance provocatively from age 12, biographers suggest deeply troubling boundaries crossed, summarized a documentary filmmaker who investigated Hayworth's early years. She was made to look older, dress older, and dance in ways that made her appealing to adult audiences long before she was an adult. While Hayworth herself never publicly discussed abuse, friends and associates reported that she had confided experiences of violation by her father during those touring years. Her numerous marriages, struggles with alcohol, and difficulties with intimate relationships have been interpreted by some biographers as evidence of early trauma. The irony of Hayworth's screen persona, the ultimate male, fantasy woman exuding confident appeal in films like Gilda, was that it existed in such stark contrast to her private reality. Behind the glamorous image was a woman who, according to those closest to her, never developed a healthy relationship with her own identity or with the men in her life. Rita created this character, the confident woman who knew her power, observed a co-star from her later films. But it was a performance, one she couldn't maintain off-screen. In private, she was insecure, easily manipulated, and deeply wounded. Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby's warm baritone defined the American Christmas season for generations. His recording of White Christmas remains the best-selling single of all time, and his affable, easygoing persona made him one of Hollywood's most beloved figures, a star who seemed to embody wholesome family values and paternal wisdom. Behind this carefully cultivated image, however, lay a much darker reality, according to the sons from his first marriage. In a memoir titled Going My Own Way, published in 1983, Crosby's eldest son, Gary, painted a devastating portrait of life in the Crosby household, one defined by rigid discipline, emotional coldness, and regular physical abuse. The voice of Christmas and the hand that scarred them forever was how one journalist summarized the stark contrast between Crosby's public and private personas. According to Gary Crosby, his father beat him and his brothers with a belt studded with metal studs on a weekly basis for minor infractions. The beatings were ritualized, with Bing requiring the boys to bend over and take their punishment without crying out. "If we got a B, we got beaten," Gary claimed in interviews promoting his book. "And if we got an A, we still got beaten because it wasn't an A." The emotional abuse, by Gary's account, was equally severe. Bing allegedly monitored his son's weight obsessively, sometimes humiliating Gary by weighing him in front of guests and withholding meals if he was deemed too heavy. The boys were expected to address their father formally as Bing, never dad or father, creating an emotional distance that Gary claimed affected him throughout his life. The long-term impact on the Crosby sons was devastating. Lindsay Crosby died of self-harm in 1989 at age 51. Dennis followed the same tragic path in 1991 at age 56. Philip died of a heart attack in 2004, having struggled with addiction issues similar to those that plagued Gary, who died of lung cancer in 1995. What makes the Crosby family story particularly significant is how completely it contradicted the star's public image. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, Bing Crosby was marketed as the ideal American father, wise, patient, and understanding. Christmas specials featuring Bing reinforce this image of domestic bliss, a fiction millions of Americans bought into completely. Rock Hudson. For millions of American women in the 1950s and early 1960s, Rock Hudson represented the ideal man, tall, handsome, and masculine, the perfect romantic lead opposite stars like Doris Day. His easy charm and all-American good looks made him one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. But Hudson was living a carefully constructed lie, one that required constant vigilance and caused immense personal suffering. Rock essentially lived two completely separate lives, explained a former publicity agent who worked with Hudson's studio. There was the public Rock, the heterosexual heartthrob whose romantic escapades with starlets were carefully planted in fan magazines. Then there was the private Rock, a gay man who could only be himself within a very small, trusted circle. This deception wasn't a personal choice but a professional necessity in an era when homosexuality was not only stigmatized, but criminalized in many states. When Hudson signed with Universal Studios in 1949, his agent Henry Wilson already understood the stakes. If Hudson's sexuality became public knowledge, his career would instantly be destroyed. The studio's protective measures were elaborate and methodical. Hudson was paired with young actresses for publicized dates, photographed by friendly press. When rumors circulated about his sexuality, the studio arranged a marriage of convenience to Wilson's secretary, Phyllis Gates. The marriage lasted just 3 years, and later Gates claimed she had been unaware it was a sham when she entered into it. The pressure of maintaining this facade was immense, recalled a close friend of Hudson's from this period. Even in private homes, there was always fear. Were the neighbors watching? Was someone going to talk to the press? Could a casual comment destroy everything he'd worked for? He never got to relax and just be himself. What makes Hudson's story particularly tragic is how his carefully maintained secret eventually became public in the most devastating way possible. In 1985, Hudson became one of the first major celebrities to die of AIDS, a condition that, especially in the early years of the crisis, was strongly associated with homosexuality. His illness and subsequent death shocked America, forcing a public reckoning with the reality that this icon of heterosexual masculinity had been gay all along. Gloria Swanson. Before Marilyn Monroe, before any hint of political scandal, Gloria Swanson engaged in a torrid affair with Joseph P. Kennedy that threatened to destroy both their worlds. Hollywood's biggest silent film star and the patriarch of America's most powerful political dynasty carried on a 3-year relationship that blended business, pleasure, and jaw-dropping financial disaster. Their affair was an open secret in Hollywood, revealed a film historian. Kennedy had been sent to evaluate Swanson's studio, but ended up evaluating a lot more than her balance sheets. While his wife Rose remained in Boston with their children, including future President John F. Kennedy, Joe was parading around Hollywood with Swanson on his arm. The relationship began in 1927 when Kennedy, a bank president venturing into film production, became Swanson's financial advisor and producer. Their professional relationship quickly turned intimate, with Kennedy installing himself in Swanson's life, redecorating her home, and even sending his own chef to prepare her meals. What made the affair particularly shocking was its brazenness. Despite both being married, they traveled together openly through Europe, with Kennedy buying Swanson lavish gifts including a gold-plated bathroom fixture set. He spent money like he was printing it in the basement, Swanson later confided to friends. The relationship crashed spectacularly when Kennedy's financial genius revealed itself as anything but. He convinced Swanson to form a production company that mysteriously lost $800,000 in a year, $12 million today. Money many suspected Kennedy pocketed himself. The coup de grace came when he arranged for her to make the disastrous film Queen Kelly, directed by Erich von Stroheim, which effectively ended Swanson's silent film career. He used her money to finance his fantasies and left her nearly bankrupt, noted a Kennedy biographer. When the relationship cooled, Swanson discovered Kennedy had been charging all their romantic European getaways to her production company. The affair ended in 1930, but the consequences lingered. The Kennedy political machine worked tirelessly to bury the story as Joe positioned his sons for political careers. Swanson largely kept silent about the relationship until her 1980 autobiography, Swanson on Swanson, by which point she had outlived both Joe Kennedy and his presidential son. Raymond Burr. For 9 seasons as Perry Mason and another 8 as Ironside, Raymond Burr embodied integrity, intelligence, and moral certainty. His deep voice and commanding presence made him one of television's most trusted figures, a star whose personal dignity seemed perfectly aligned with the righteous characters he portrayed. What viewers didn't know was that Burr's entire public biography was an elaborate fiction carefully constructed to hide his homosexuality in an era when being gay would have instantly ended his career. The fabrication wasn't just a matter of silence or evasion. It was an astonishingly detailed alternative life history, complete with a deceased wife, a tragically lost son, and heroic war service, none of which actually existed. America's courtroom hero lived inside a lie he wrote himself, explained an entertainment historian. And it wasn't a simple lie. It was a complete parallel life with emotional depth, tragic elements, and the kind of details that made it virtually unquestionable. Burr claimed to have been married 3 times. His first wife, he told interviewers, was Scottish actress Annette Sutherland, who had supposedly died in the same 1943 plane crash that killed actor Leslie Howard. His second marriage was said to be to Isabella Ward. And indeed, Burr had married Ward briefly in the 1940s, his only actual marriage. But his most elaborate fiction concerned his third supposed wife, Laura Andrina Morgan, whom he claimed died of cancer. The most heartbreaking element of Burr's fabricated life was the son he invented, Michael Evan Burr, who he claimed had died of leukemia as a child in 1953. Burr would speak movingly in interviews about his loss, describing how this tragedy had deepened his empathy and shaped his approach to life. Burr also invented a heroic military record, claiming to have been wounded in the stomach during World War II while serving in the U.S. Navy in Okinawa. In reality, military records show no evidence of such service or injury. From the early 1950s until his death in 1993, Burr was in a committed relationship with Robert Benavides, whom he had met on the set of Perry Mason. The couple owned an orchid business and a vineyard together. Though publicly, Benavides was always described as Burr's business partner or longtime friend. Marlene Dietrich. With her perfectly sculpted features and enigmatic gaze, Marlene Dietrich conquered Hollywood as the ultimate femme fatale. But while the public saw only her string of leading men, Dietrich maintained a shocking private life that would have ended her career instantly if revealed. An open marriage that included numerous affairs with both men and women from Hollywood's elite circles. Dietrich lived by her own rules in an era when that simply wasn't allowed for women, explained a film historian. Her husband Rudolf Sieber knew about and accepted her countless liaisons. They maintained a marriage of convenience while both pursued relationships outside it, an arrangement that would have scandalized America if publicized. The list of Dietrich's alleged lovers reads like a who's who of Hollywood: Gary Cooper, John Wayne, James Stewart, Maurice Chevalier, and Edward R. Murrow among the men. But equally shocking for the era were her relationships with women, including writer Mercedes D'Acosta, actress Tallulah Bankhead, and possibly Greta Garbo, though Garbo always denied these rumors. Her daughter Maria Riva later revealed that Dietrich kept detailed records of her conquests, including love letters and mementos, meticulously organized in a series of trunks. Mother collected lovers like some women collected shoes, Riva told reporters after Dietrich's death. Studio executives at Paramount knew of Dietrich's private life, but constructed an elaborate public relations strategy to maintain her image. They created passionate publicity romances with her male co-stars while bearing any hint of her relationships with women, noted a former Paramount publicist. The studio's fixers were on constant alert for photographers or journalists who might expose her. Perhaps most remarkable was how Dietrich maintained this double life for decades without exposure. She was cunning about her privacy, wrote one biographer. She understood that her mystique depended on the public never fully knowing her. So she carefully controlled her image while living exactly as she pleased behind closed doors. When Dietrich died in 1992, at age 90, she took many secrets to her grave. The world knew her famous line, "I want to be alone," said a former assistant. What they didn't know was that she was rarely actually alone. She just carefully chose who shared her solitude. Ingrid Bergman. Ingrid Bergman embodied wholesome beauty and moral virtue in classics like Casablanca and The Bells of St. Mary's, building a reputation as Hollywood's most respectable leading lady. Then in 1950, she shattered that image with a scandal so explosive it was denounced on the floor of the United States Senate and led to her being effectively exiled from America for 7 years. Bergman didn't just have an affair, she completely blew up her life and career for love in a way that shocked and horrified 1950s America, explained a film historian. When she abandoned her husband and daughter for Italian director Roberto Rossellini, becoming pregnant with his child while still married, it created a moral outrage almost impossible to comprehend by today's standards. The scandal erupted when Bergman, married to neurosurgeon Petter Lindstrom, traveled to Italy to work with Rossellini on the film Stromboli. Their professional relationship quickly became personal, and Bergman became pregnant. Rather than hiding the relationship or having a discreet procedure as many stars would have done, Bergman made the stunning decision to publicly leave her husband and daughter for Rossellini. The backlash was immediate and devastating. Senator Edwin C. Johnson of Colorado denounced Bergman on the Senate floor as a powerful influence for evil, while theaters canceled showings of her films. Fan clubs disbanded overnight, and her name became synonymous with moral corruption. Hollywood, which had weathered many scandals, considered Bergman's case particularly egregious because her wholesome image had been so central to her appeal. The studios had marketed her as the anti-femme fatale, the good girl, the nun, the devoted wife, noted a film critic. Her personal choices completely contradicted the image they'd spent years building. They couldn't forgive that. Bergman would remain in Europe for 7 years, marrying Rossellini and having 3 children with him, including a daughter who would later become a famous model and actress herself, Isabella Rossellini. She won her second Oscar while still in exile, but could not attend to accept it. Her return to Hollywood came only in 1957, when she appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show and received a standing ovation, signaling that her lengthy period of punishment had ended. The scandal that nearly destroyed her ultimately revealed Bergman's extraordinary courage. Unlike most stars of her era, she refused to live a lie, regardless of the professional consequences. Spencer Tracy. One of Hollywood's most celebrated love stories, the 26-year affair between Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, has long been portrayed as the ultimate example of devoted partnership, despite the obstacle of Tracy's Catholic refusal to divorce his wife. This narrative of star-crossed lovers sacrificing conventional marriage for enduring devotion became Hollywood legend, reinforced through countless biographies and film retrospectives. However, persistent rumors among industry insiders suggested a completely different reality, that the relationship was largely a carefully crafted publicity arrangement benefiting both stars for entirely different reasons. What audiences saw as Hollywood's greatest love affair was actually a complex professional arrangement with personal benefits for both parties, revealed a studio executive from the era. Tracy needed cover for his drinking and volatile behavior, while Hepburn's independent, sometimes masculine persona had generated dangerous speculation about her personal life during an era when even a hint of unconventional behavior meant career death. Studio executives, recognizing the potential value in linking these two valuable but vulnerable stars, allegedly encouraged a public narrative of forbidden heterosexual romance. This arrangement offered perfect cover. Tracy's inability to divorce explained why they never married, while their relationship provided both with the appearance of conventional lives without the obligations of actual romance. What gave this rumor particular persistence was how it explained certain inconsistencies in the official narrative. Despite supposedly being devoted partners for over 2 decades, the pair never lived together full-time, maintained separate residences throughout their relationship, and were rarely photographed together in intimate settings. Several crew members from their 9 films together described their relationship as resembling close friends or siblings rather than passionate lovers, with none of the subtle physical intimacy typically observed between romantic partners even in professional settings. The genius of the arrangement was that it worked for everyone, noted a film historian. The studios protected 2 valuable stars, The public got a romantic narrative they adored, and Tracy and Hepburn received both professional collaboration and personal privacy. Whether they were actually in love is something only they knew for certain. Jean Tierney. Jean Tierney possessed a beauty so striking that director Otto Preminger called her, unquestionably, the most beautiful woman in movie history. With her perfect bone structure and distinctive overbite, Tierney created iconic performances in films like Laura and Leave Her to Heaven. Behind this glamorous image, however, lay a personal tragedy so cruel it could have been plucked from a Greek drama. What happened to Jean Tierney is one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking stories, explained a biographer who studied Tierney's life. It demonstrates how one moment, one interaction that seemed insignificant at the time, can set off a chain of events that destroys lives. The tragedy began in 1943 when Tierney, pregnant with her first child, made an appearance at the Hollywood Canteen where stars entertained military personnel. Among the many fans she met that night was a woman who would later have devastating significance. Tierney's daughter Daria was born severely disabled, blind, deaf, and with significant cognitive impairments caused by congenital rubella syndrome. Doctors explained that Tierney must have contracted rubella during her pregnancy, but she couldn't recall being ill. The horrifying truth was revealed years later at another meet-and-greet event. A female fan approached Tierney and mentioned their previous meeting at the Hollywood Canteen, adding a chilling detail. She had been sick with rubella at the time, but had broken quarantine because she so badly wanted to meet the star. When Jean understood what this meant, that this woman had knowingly exposed her to an illness that had destroyed her daughter's future, she was shattered, recounted a close friend of the actress. She said nothing to the woman. She simply turned away and later said she felt physically ill by the revelation. This knowledge became a psychological breaking point for Tierney, who had already been struggling with the challenges of raising a severely disabled child while maintaining her career. She began experiencing severe depression and was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder, leading to multiple hospitalizations. At the height of her beauty and fame, Tierney underwent brutal electroconvulsive therapy treatments that affected her memory and cognitive abilities. Her career never fully recovered, though she did eventually find some stability with proper treatment and a supportive second marriage. Lana Turner. One of Hollywood's most glamorous stars, became entangled in a scandal so dark it involved organized crime, domestic violence, and a fatal stabbing in her Beverly Hills home. Lana Turner's involvement in the 1958 death of her boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, created a sensational case that permanently altered her public image. Turner wasn't just a movie star. She became headline news in what looked like a film noir plot come to life, explained a crime historian. A beautiful actress, her teenage daughter, and a mobster boyfriend in a deadly confrontation that left one dead and careers hanging in the balance. The official narrative states that on April 4, 1958, Turner's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, stabbed Stompanato, a known associate of mobster Mickey Cohen, after witnessing him physically threatening her mother during an argument. A coroner's inquest ruled the death justifiable homicide, accepting the explanation that Cheryl was protecting her mother from imminent harm. However, alternative theories began circulating in Hollywood and organized crime circles. The most persistent rumor suggested that Turner herself had actually stabbed Stompanato during their argument, with Cheryl taking responsibility to protect her mother. This version gained traction due to Turner's supposed concern that her career couldn't survive the scandal of killing her lover, while her daughter would face more lenient treatment as a minor. The studios still controlled stars' images with iron fists, noted a film historian. MGM executives were on scene before the police, allegedly to ensure their valuable star was protected regardless of what actually happened. Turner had met Stompanato, a handsome ex-Marine with mob connections, during her fourth divorce. Friends had warned her about his violent temper and criminal associates, but the relationship continued until that fatal night. The case became a media sensation, with Turner making a dramatic courtroom appearance to testify about Stompanato's threats and abuse. The scandal transformed Turner's public image. Before the stabbing, she had been primarily known as a glamorous star discovered at a soda fountain. Afterwards, she became permanently associated with scandal, danger, and poor choices in men. Her career never fully recovered from the shadow these events cast, despite her continuing to work for many years afterward. Montgomery Clift. With his sensitive performances and haunting good looks, Montgomery Clift revolutionized screen acting, bringing an unprecedented emotional vulnerability to Hollywood leading men. But behind his intense performances lay a private life filled with pain, secrets, and self-destruction that would ultimately lead to his premature death at age 45. Monty lived in absolute terror of being exposed, revealed a close friend years after Clift's death. As a gay man in 1950s Hollywood, discovery meant instant career death. This created unbearable psychological pressure that he medicated with alcohol and pills, slowly destroying himself to maintain his public image. Unlike some contemporaries who arranged lavender marriages as cover, Clift refused to create a completely false public persona. Instead, he lived in a dangerous middle ground, never publicly acknowledging his sexuality, but refusing to construct an elaborate heterosexual fiction. This made studio executives nervous and gossip columnists suspicious. The studios would set him up on publicity dates with actresses that made everyone uncomfortable, noted a former publicist. He'd attend premieres with women on his arm, then disappear to private parties where he could briefly be himself before returning to the exhausting charade. The turning point came in 1956 when Clift crashed his car, leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home. The accident severely damaged his once beautiful face, requiring extensive reconstruction and leaving him in constant pain. Studio publicity departments described it as unfortunate, but privately, insiders called it inevitable, the physical manifestation of his internal suffering. What few knew was that Clift had been keeping meticulous records of his own decline. After his death, friends discovered journals documenting his daily pain levels, medication intake, and professional rejections. Left eye mobility, 38% of right, pain level, 8.4 at lunch, 9.2 by curtain, read one typical entry. He also tracked roles lost, 14 entries, each a major production, including On the Waterfront, which would win Marlon Brando his Oscar. Clift's note beside it read, offered, revoked, face not bankable. He calculated the income lost, $722,800, equivalent to over $6 million today. His final years were marked by increasing substance dependency, erratic behavior on sets, and physical deterioration that shocked colleagues. When he died in 1966, Elizabeth Taylor reportedly said, "The longest death in Hollywood history has ended. Montgomery Clift has finally gotten what he's wanted all his life." Vivien Leigh. Vivien Leigh's on-screen elegance, immortalized in roles like Scarlett O'Hara and Blanche Dubois, belied a life painstakingly measured in margins. When the Victoria and Albert Museum acquired her extensive archive in 2013, they uncovered a treasure trove of 7,500 personal items, including letters, photographs, and most notably, journals documenting her battle with severe bipolar disorder. The world saw this ethereal beauty winning Oscars, but behind closed doors, Leigh was fighting a daily battle with her own mind, explained a curator who helped catalog her papers. Her journals document 22 manic episodes and 5 major depressive crashes over decades, all while maintaining a brilliant career in an era when mental illness was deeply stigmatized. Leigh often used coded symbols to track her mental state, later confirmed by medical records as consistent with bipolar disorder. During the troubled filming of Elephant Walk, Leigh penned the chilling line, "Saw tigers today and tigers inside." She was eventually replaced by Elizabeth Taylor due to a breakdown. Her marriage to Laurence Olivier, considered a golden union of theatrical royalty, was strained to breaking by her condition. "Living with Vivien is like living with a time bomb," Olivier confided to friends. He struggled to understand her wild mood swings, from periods of extraordinary creativity and charm to dark depressions and frightening manias. Another revealing facet of her psyche was her fixation with measurements. She scored each opening night performance from 1 to 10 on applause intensity and calculated the acoustics of different theaters. A 1949 scribble dissecting Olivier's stage performance reads, "Hamlet's Kiss, 68% stage, 32% mine." Her private calculations of intimacy blurred lines between performance and passion, underscoring how much of her real self was lost in roles others handed her. As public applause swelled, Vivian Lee's voice became more statistical, more analytical, as if data could save her from emotional ruin. Her ability to give transcendent performances while battling severe mental illness makes her achievements all the more remarkable, noted a biographer. Many days she could barely function, yet somehow summoned the strength to create some of cinema's most memorable characters, often playing women on the edge of sanity, drawing from her own experience. James Dean. James Dean's death at just 24 cemented his image as the ultimate rebel icon. But a 2023 estate auction changed that narrative, unveiling a deeply insecure, vulnerable young man struggling under the weight of his myth. Among 500 personal artifacts from the estate of his agent, Jane Deasy, was a 60-page handwritten journal that completely reframed Dean's legend. Dean carefully manufactured his tough guy image, but his private writings reveal someone terrified of being exposed as a fraud, explained the auction curator. He wasn't naturally rebellious. He was desperately insecure, cataloging his fears and rejections with obsessive precision. The most chilling illustration features a rough pencil sketch of his Porsche 550 Spider, the car he would die in. Underneath it, the caption, "Speed is only borrowed." Throughout the journal, Dean kept a list titled, "Fears I Pretend Are Thrills," a tally that reached 92 by August 1955. These fears included abandonment, exposure, and irrelevance. He also maintained a brutal rejection inventory listing every role he didn't get. Here to Eternity, Picnic, The Silver Chalice. For each, he scribbled a counter column, "I'll show them." That list grew longer than the rejection column. Film historians noted his fixation with quantifying everything. He recorded RPMs on his motorcycle, cigarette brand preferences per day, and even sorted categories of fan mail: musk, gardenia, tobacco. One candid and previously unknown revelation is a description of a 1954 tryst with a studio executive traded, as he put it, for a Buick and a promise. This single line shattered the image of Dean as a self-made outsider, revealing instead a young actor navigating the same power games that shaped so many careers in mid-century Hollywood. In a letter never mailed to choreographer Jack Simmons, Dean confessed, "The mask sticks tighter after every autograph." The diary was auctioned for $850,000, becoming one of the most expensive personal journals in film history. Rather than glorifying rebellion, Dean's pages exposed a young man calculating his legacy in advance, choking on the price of fame before he'd even finished paying for it. As one collector noted, "We thought we knew James Dean. These papers prove we never did." Patty Duke. In the early 1960s, Patty Duke was America's perfect teenager. Her Academy Award-winning performance as Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker had established her as a serious young actress, and her wholesome sitcom, The Patty Duke Show, brought her into living rooms across the country. This carefully constructed image collapsed spectacularly in 1970 when the 23-year-old Duke announced her pregnancy while unable to identify with certainty who the father was. The ensuing scandal revealed not just a young woman's personal crisis, but the tremendous gap between her public persona and private reality. Hollywood sweetheart trapped in a real-life paternity scandal, noted a television historian. It was as if America's collective daughter had suddenly revealed a secret life no one suspected. The paternity question involved three men, actors John Astin, Desi Arnaz Jr., and Michael Tell. Duke had been involved with 17-year-old Arnaz, a relationship that had infuriated Lucille Ball, who reportedly used her considerable industry influence to keep the young couple apart. During this period of emotional turmoil, Duke impulsively married Michael Tell, a complete stranger who had been subletting her apartment in what she later described as a manic episode. The marriage lasted just 13 days before being annulled. When Duke discovered she was pregnant, she believed the father was John Astin, who was married to someone else at the time. She announced publicly that Astin was the father, and after his divorce they married and he adopted the child named Sean. Three men in the press married one for 13 days. Years later, DNA proved none of them were the father, summarized a journalist who covered the story's later developments. This statement, however, isn't entirely accurate. DNA testing years later would confirm that Tell was in fact Sean Astin's biological father, though Duke herself may not have been aware of this at the time of the pregnancy. What the public didn't know during the scandal was that Duke was suffering from undiagnosed bipolar disorder, experiencing manic episodes that led to impulsive behavior, followed by crushing depressions. Her increasingly erratic conduct wasn't simply celebrity excess, but symptoms of a serious mental illness that wouldn't be properly diagnosed until 1982. "I was living in a complete fog," Duke later wrote in her autobiography. "The choices I made during manic phases weren't really choices at all. They were driven by a brain chemistry I didn't understand and couldn't control." Sean Astin, the child at the center of this confusion, grew up to become a successful actor himself, starring in films like The Goonies, Rudy, and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. As an adult, he sought to understand his biological origins through DNA testing, which confirmed Tell as his biological father. Which of these controversial celebrities surprised you most? Was it the wholesome family man who terrorized his children, or the screen goddess hiding childhood trauma? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and ask yourself if studios could hide these explosive secrets without social media or digital trails. What might today's carefully managed celebrities be hiding from us right now?